Genshin Impact is a game that came out of the right place at the right time. Its fantastical world captivated audiences along with its phenomenal cast of characters. Characters that would go on to help tell a story that would span multiple years. A story whose lore went deeper than the bottom of the chasm itself, and whose history at times seems to be darker than our own. So it's a shame that I have to tell you that how they chose to tell that story is fucking terrible. It's astounding how a company that makes this much money could fuck things up so badly. From the main quest, to the timed events, to the character quests, and so on. At every turn, for every good decision that's made, it feels like there's 10 bad ones to go along with it. So, come along with me, and see how Genshin Impact is a failure in storytelling. But before I fully dive in, I want to make a couple distinctions. 1. Genshin is definitely trying to tell a story, despite large chunks being hidden behind different aspects of gameplay, which we'll get into later. A large portion of the game is dedicated to a long-running narrative, and anybody that tells you otherwise is either lying or misinformed. 2. The story of Genshin isn't the bad part. The amount of effort that has gone into the lore and backstory of everything and everyone is incredible. It is how that story is being told and directed towards the players is what makes it bad. So with all that said, let's start at the beginning. The prologue of Genshin isn't terrible. It's rather slow, yes, but not unbearable. There are quite a few games, especially RPGs, that get off to a slow start. For some games, they wait and slowly introduce the world through small bits of dialogue as well as an introduction to the gameplay. Genshin also does this. As we open up to a beach, the game introduces us to our character, as well as our traveling companion, Paimon, and yes, I'll talk about her later. And we set off on our journey as we learn the mechanics and gameplay. A small amount of travel later, and we soon discover Genshin's colorful cast of characters. And it's here that the game's story kicks off. We must save the city of Mondstadt from the onslaught of a vicious dragon. A classic tale when you think about it. And after a series of trials and tribulations, we are able to receive help from the region's god and save the city as well as the dragon. But just as we think all's well that ends well, the main character and Venti, the god from before, are ambushed by the Fatui, a malicious force from a rival country. The group is led by a woman named Senora. Oh boy, can't wait to talk about her later. She then proceeds to attack Venti and steal something from him. After this altercation, we revive and we seek out Venti, who tells us to go to the next country to continue our journey. Like I said, I don't think the prologue is that bad. Some of the tasks are tedious, sure, but I personally think we have enough to distract us from the slow start. There are chests to open, areas to explore, enemies to kill, and characters to pull. Yeah, I see the elephant in the room, but I'm not here to talk about the wish system. Back to my point, I think there's enough to keep you busy during the story. I think it's a solid prologue. I just have a couple problems with it. 1. What were Paimon and the Traveler doing on the beach for 2 months?
I met you 2 months ago.
At the start of the game, it's explained that the Traveler and Paimon had been camping out for 2 months. What were they doing? Why didn't Paimon take the Traveler to Mondstadt? It's like a couple miles away! Paimon seems interested in taking the Traveler there once the game starts, but she didn't think to take us there beforehand.
We should head off. Let's get going!
Were the Traveler and Paimon just swapping ghost stories over the campfire? What was going on? 2. What is Paimon? And how come nobody asks about her? Now this one might seem a bit strange, but hear me out. I understand that the characters ask about Paimon, and we explain to them that she is our traveling companion. Or emergency food. But that's not what I mean. Not one person we come across has really ever pondered Paimon. Think about it. Have we met anything like her in 2 years? I know her identity is meant to be a mystery, but this is weird. Everyone around us hasn't pulled us aside and asked, "Who is that?" And, "I've never seen one." Questions that would seem normal and valid under the circumstances. All the NPCs and playable characters seem to act like Paimon belongs here. It's just all very strange. The second act of Genshin's story quest seems to pick things up in my opinion, despite having to do multiple fetch quests and sit through several minutes of dialogue. What the Liyue portion of the story offers is something special. From the mystery surrounding the death of Rex Lapis to ascending to the Jade Chamber, all culminating into a fight with the Fatui Harbinger child. And in my opinion, this is where Genshin Impact's story peaks. And then it ends. And it's not as if the story becomes worse after this point. However, I personally feel that it doesn't get any better. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. As we deal with the revelation of Rex Lapis, which, let's be real, most people saw coming, we celebrate and close out the second region of Genshin. For me, the story was pretty smooth. but for some people, I understand if it might have been a little repetitive. You see, I started Genshin when it first launched in North America, and as mentioned before, I was distracted with the gameplay and exploration that by the time I made it through halfway of Liyue's story quest, I was forced to take a break to the next installment. This would come in early November as Genshin would be updated with a new story quest. As a result, I was able to avoid most of the repetitiveness of the story quest. But I understand how daunting it could be for others who came later and could not. Other than that, I don't have any problems with the story. Although the problem with Paimon still applies. No, it wouldn't be until the next region where Genshin's story started to collapse. To say that the region of Inazuma was heavily anticipated would be an understatement. You see, up until this point, we didn't have many new areas to explore. We received Dragonspine back in version 1.2, and to be fair, we got the Golden Apple Archipelago in 1.6, but only for a limited time. It wasn't until after the Summer Islands event in 1.6 that we received Inazuma. To start off, we are told to go meet up with Captain Beto of the Crux to make our way to Inazuma. Beto would have been a playable character since the game's launch, so it was nice for players to finally meet the strong and dependable captain of the Crux fleet. It's here where we also meet a wandering samurai by the name of Kaide Harakazuwa, who is from the next region of Inazuma. And as we spend a little bit more time with him, we learn of his past and just how dangerous this next leg of the trip is going to be. And so we board the Alcor and set sail to Inazuma, the country said to be protected by a perpetual storm blanketing the region. And we get to see none of it. When we board the Crux and head out at sea, we are given a brief cutscene before immediately cutting to our arrival on Inazuma. The storm, which had been so heavily built up, was completely skipped over. And so, having finally arrived in Inazuma, we step off the boat and start the next part of our journey. To be honest, how the next section of the Archon quest begins is not that bad. As we follow the traveler, we meet several new characters along the way. As we step off the Alcor, we first meet Toma, and it's here that rather slow portion of the game rears its ugly head once more. As Toma introduces us to the land of Electro, we are given a brief look into its economy and politics, and that's just fine. But it all changes when we are tasked by Toma to help out the locals. And this is the slow portion I was talking about. Genshin has a way of telling its story that is rather slow and painful. Dialogue through NPCs. And look, I understand that you need to talk to NPCs in other video games, but these parts of the quest are unbearably long. And at least in other games the main character will talk to the NPCs, but not in this game, which brings me to my next problem. I was going to talk about this later, but you know what? F it, let's talk about it now.
Uh-oh.
Paimon?
Paimon?
Paimon.
Paimon?
Paimon.
Paimon?
Paimon.
Paimon? Paimon?
Flying lavender melon.
Paimon. Paimon has single-handedly become one of the worst things about the story, as well as the game. Instead of having the traveler talk, somebody thought it would be a good idea for Paimon to talk over them the whole time. I can count on one hand the amount of times the traveler has spoken. The main character, for whatever reason, doesn't speak. Why? Can you imagine in The Witcher if Geralt didn't speak, but instead his horse Roach spoke for him? How about in the anime series Bleach? What if Cone spoke for Ichigo? You know, Cone, the stuffed animal? Imagine if he spoke the whole time. And not only that, but Paimon will insist on explaining entire sections of dialogue that we just discussed with an NPC. Paimon will go out of her way to explain to you, like a baby, our objective, how we're supposed to reach said objective, and why that objective is so important. Like we're playing a gacha version of Dora the Explorer.
That's one heck of an info dump.
Paimon is a mascot.
And this mascot, what's the deal with it?
Mascots are meant to be seen, not heard. Now with all that said, let's get back to Inazuma. So, after dealing with some side quests, we are finally able to leave the first island and explore. And it's after this point that the gameplay as well as the story picks up. We get to explore the area some more and interact with new enemies as well as new mechanics. The story introduces us to Ayaka as well as Yoimiya, and gives us a glimpse on how both characters play a role in the Archon quest, as Ayaka tries to rope us into the conflict with Inazuma, to which the traveler refuses for some reason. I don't know why. In the end, she convinces us and we are thrusted headlong into a confrontation with the Electro Archon, who at this point has been teased to be an antagonist, a ruler with an iron fist. And now we must face off, one-on-one, and we lose. I gotta be honest, this first part of the story is great. Yes, we did have to get through that first rough patch, but now we're here fighting the Shogun, and everything is on point. From the animation to the voice acting, as well as the music. It's all phenomenal. And so, after being defeated, we are forced to run away and meet with the Resistance on Watatsumi Island. It's here that we are introduced to characters like Kokomi, the leader of the Resistance, and her General Goro. We are also introduced to an NPC named Tepe, who I will talk about later. We then engage with the Shogun's forces. And then, once the battle ends, the first part in Inazuma's story quest is finished. And it's past this point when I realized that the story was slowly falling apart. The second half of the story at one point seems quite beautiful, but for the most part it feels uneventful and pointless. That isn't to say that all of the Archon quest is boring. The climax, for instance, is enjoyable, but therein lies the problem. I feel like the climax is the only interesting part. Let's review. After the battle, you were given an invitation to Watatsumi Island to meet with the Resistance and Kokomi. We were escorted by Teppei, the NPC I mentioned before, and are given a position within the Resistance, a somewhat high-ranking position, and are set off on a mission with our new squad. This does nothing. It's a group made of 2 NPCs. But that's fine. Maybe we'll get to explore their backstories and find out why they're in the Resistance. Ha 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 ha. Nope. This game can't be bothered to make you care about the side you're fighting on. For fuck's sake, this is a story about rebellion. We're over halfway through and I can barely be bothered to care about the good guys. This might as well be an anime version of Star Wars in video game form. How are the writers having such a hard time with this? And it's here where the biggest problem with Genshin story quests start to expose its biggest weakness. All telling and absolutely no showing. Genshin Impact breaks the number one rule of storytelling in a visual medium. The main character is supposed to be training with their squad, but it's never shown. How many people are in our squad?
Don't know.
How did Teppei receive a promotion?
Don't know either.
How am I supposed to care about any of this?
Also don't know.
Anyway, let's move on. We find out that Fatui have been supplying the Resistance with delusions, something similar to visions that give the characters elemental abilities. But there's a catch. Delusions give power in exchange for life force. And wouldn't you know it, Teppei had one. And it ends up killing him. Kind of. We aren't even told or shown directly that he died. When last we see him, it's kind of implied that he just fell asleep. Remember guys, we're playing a baby game. We can't have a character die on screen. It's heavily implied in Kokomi's story quest that he passed away, but we aren't even shown his funeral. Come on. And here I thought I was supposed to care about this character. If they had spent a little bit more time and actually given him a unique model and made us spend more time with him, learning his motivations and his reasons for joining the Resistance, then maybe, just maybe, I could have cared. We then go on to confront the Fatui and reunite with Scaramouche, who's number 6th of the Fatui Harbingers. Wait, hang on. You don't remember meeting him? Huh. Well, I certainly hope it isn't some kind of foreshadowing. We are beaten. Somehow. We are then rescued by Yae Miko, cue training montage, and we go to confront the Shogun. And who should be waiting for us none other than... Senora? What happened to Scaramouche? Oh, wait, I think I know what happened. See, this was supposed to be Scaramouche's region, but in development as they were making this portion of the game, they had geared us up with the fight with Senora. But then remembered Scaramouche was supposed to make an appearance at some point, and then proceeded to replace Senora with Scaramouche halfway through. But it's only a theory. But it could explain why he shows up so randomly in this one segment, and why the fight with Senora feels so anticlimactic in some ways. Or they're just bad at writing. And then we finally defeat Senora, and then she dies? What the fuck? Okay, maybe she's still alive. I mean, come on, she has a really tragic backstory, really deep, really rich. They just wouldn't kill her off so unsanctimoniously. I mean, so many people wanted to wish for her. Why are you laughing? And so, we face off against the Shogun. And the cutscene is cool, the music is cool, the action is cool. Did you catch all that? This particular part is good. This is the part in every reaction on YouTube that you see. Everybody's excited, people are going wild, we're all invested. But what about the rest of it? Genshin's story does this quite a bit, but here, I think it's more noticeable. Before, we spent time with other characters and learned how they fit in the world and how the events of the main quest were affecting them. But here it feels like they're barely involved. Think about it. Who fights the Shogun? It's just the main character. We hardly receive no aid from the other characters of Inazuma, at least in the final fight. What a wasted opportunity. How cool would it have been if we got to play as each one of the good guys? You know, Aika, Toma, Yoimiya, Goru, Kokomi, all of them fighting to save their country. As it is though, I suppose it's alright. We fight the Shogun, start to lose, gain the power of friendship, and win. The end. So with all that said and done, we move on. And despite certain aspects of the story not being so great, at the very least, it's all complete. I mean, could you imagine if they tried to tell major story points in timed events? Imagine, if you will, your favorite show. Suddenly, a plot point you've never heard of gets brought up. You then come to find out that same plot point was brought up in a special limited time episode, and your chance to watch it has come and gone. This is what it's like with certain parts of Genshin Impact. Do you remember when I brought up Scaramouche earlier? I wasn't lying when I told you our meeting in Inazuma wasn't his first appearance. On November 16th, 2020, Genshin released a new event titled Unreconciled Stars. It would mark the first time where the player base could receive a free character. During this event, players could obtain the character Official as a reward. This would also mark the first time players could see a limited story event, although as you may have guessed, this would be to the game's detriment. In the event, we are tasked by the Adventurers Guild to investigate meteors falling from the sky, and as it just so happens, the guild has also hired Official, as well as the astrologist Mona. Well, isn't that interesting? Were any of you wondering how they met and became friends during the 2.8 event? It was here, in Unreconciled Stars. It's here where we also meet Scaramouche, the 6th Harbinger. At first he betrays himself as an unassuming wanderer, but it's later revealed who he really is, a malicious member of the Fatui, who at this point had set his sights on killing us. Keep that in mind for later. It's also during this event where we learn the sky is false, which is interesting, but you want to know what's even more interesting? It's never brought up again. For some reason. Seems like that'd be kind of important. I guess not. This is just the first story event. I have a few more to cover. The summer event in 1.6 introduces us to Klee's mother, Alice, albeit only through audio. It also gives us the first verified confirmation of Jean and Barbara being sisters. Granted, that didn't need confirmation, but it was nice nonetheless. There's also 2.1 and the Moon Chase Festival. Not much happens. Just some friends hanging out, some cooking, and oh yeah, Groba's a god. I just thought I'd let you know that the bear who's been hanging around Shangling is actually a god. Just a little detail there. On top of all this, we have the reveal that Albedo is a homunculus. It's not important at all. No, why would it be? Are you starting to see the problem? Some of these are big reveals, but they're being wasted in limited time events. They don't come back. So the only way you can see them is on YouTube through other people, and not Genshin's own account. Genshin does have the cutscenes on their main YouTube channel, but just the cutscenes, not the entire story that's played out, so you're still missing a lot. And some people have been lucky enough to find these in their entirety. I'm talking about content creators as well as streamers, the people who started late but have the benefit of having an audience to tell them what they missed and where to look for it. But other people don't have that luxury. Not everybody has an audience. So the best case scenario for them is to do homework for a video game, which you should never have to do under any circumstances, period. Some of this is very harmful to the overall story quest that they're trying to tell. They just don't realize it. But then that begs the question. If major plot points for some of these characters are being brought up in limited timed events, then what's happening in their character quests? I personally believe that a story is only as good as the characters that reside within it. And Genshin has really good characters, but you wouldn't know that playing through their individual story quests. It's incredibly bizarre that MiHoYo would take this much time and effort in making amazing characters only for that effort to go to waste. Let me explain. Let's start with Diluc. Diluc is characterized pretty well at first. He plays the role of millionaire by day and vigilante by night. Mondstadt's version of Batman, if you will, which gives us a good introduction, but that's it. If you were hoping for a little bit more backstory for him, tough luck. A large portion of his backstory is locked away behind Genshin's manga, which is fine if you're willing to go out of your way to read it. But what if you didn't? Or worse, you didn't even know it existed? I have a big problem with important information being held from the consumer in other forms of media. This applies to most things. For example, you wouldn't read Harry Potter only to find out Harry Potter's backstory is actually not in the book, but instead inside of a magazine. This just isn't how things are done. What about Jean? How does her story hold up? It's just a birthday party, and not much more. It does give you a slight insight into her character, but not much else. They didn't even go out of their way to explain that Barbara and Jean are sisters. The game doesn't even offer the bare minimum here. We are told that Jean works hard, the people of Mondstadt respect her, and we are told that she admires Vanessa, which you may not even know who the hell that is. Just FYI, she's from the manga. I know, what a shocker. There's nothing here but an introduction, which is fine, but there's no second chapter after 2 years, and I suspect there may never be one. And then there's Klee, who is super adorable, but other than that, there's not much to be said, well, except maybe for her reckless nature perhaps. Next up is Mona, and with her we are given a little bit more towards the end with her interactions with Klee, but that's all. I could continue, but why bother? At this point, I'm being a bit of a broken record here. Everything I just mentioned applies to almost every character. Their individual quests give you a brief introduction to what the character is like, and then it's over. When are we going to cover Diluc's backstory? Are we ever going to get around to his relationship with Kaya? What was it like for Jean and Barbara growing up? What is the relationship between Mona and her master really like? Who is Mona's master? What was it like for Klee and Albedo growing up? Look, I only just covered Mondstadt characters, but this applies to everybody else as well. All these quests do is scratch the surface on really deep characters. And the sad thing is, it appears that Genshin doesn't even care. I can only think of one character where that's different. It's Venti. Now, to be fair, his quest is also bogged down with the same problems plaguing every other character. That is to say, most of our time is spent talking to NPCs and not learning much about the titular character. However, what makes Venti's story quest different from all the others is how it ends. At the tail end of his quest, we actually receive some backstory for the animal Archon. For the first time, we actually receive some lore for not only the character, but the region as well. Well, okay. Maybe since Venti's god, that might be the reason why we get some lore for his character. And if that's the case, maybe the other Archons will have just as much backstory as he did. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Zhongli's first story quest is nothing more than a tease. In our search to uncover the secret behind the god of salt, we are taken beneath the lands of Liyue, and it's here where we discover the remnants of a civilization. Although, from what little is left, it's nothing more than a tomb. We think at first they might be statues, but instead they are the people from the land of salt, frozen for all time behind the mineral for which the land, as well as the god, is named for. And while we are told of the events that took place here, we are given nothing more. See, at the beginning of the quest, it's heavily implied that Zhongli may have killed the god of salt long ago. He is able to prove his innocence at the end of it, as the goddess was killed by her own people. But there are so many other questions that can be answered here. What was his relationship with this god? Had she ever sought out his help? Had they ever met to begin with? With his second quest, things are a little bit better. We are given some backstory for him, as well as a pretty decent boss fight with Ajdaha. But with this quest, it's the exception and not the standard. And now with Zhongli out of the way, we can move on to A. And she's even worse than he was. What does the leader of a war-torn country have to offer? A date. Kind of. See, what Raiden Shogun's quest offers is a tour through Inazuma, but you're not the tourist. A is. Because the Electro Archon is such a shut-in, the traveler has to play tour guide. I have several problems with this, but it's not what you would think. It isn't necessarily the nature of the quest itself that makes me frustrated, it's how it's presented. How this could have played out is so simple. Just have the other characters show up as you and the Raiden Shogun are walking about. We could have Ayaka and Toma help us explain the inner workings of Inazuma to the Electro Archon as we parade around town. We could then visit Kujo-Sara, who would be more than eager to show the Shogun around the Tenryou Commission. And then finally we can get a visit from Miko. You know, Yae Miko. The one who's been with A most of her life, who hardly shows up in the quest at all. And while we're at it, why don't we have flashbacks for the characters that show up in her teaser? Like, who are all these people? What role did they serve in Inazuma? Who are these people? What was the previous Raiden Shogun like? Who are these people? What were the battles that A took part in long ago? Who the f*** are these people? I need to know, man. I need to know. That fox lady looking super sexy. And then have it end with a fireworks show by Yoimiya. Just a thought. Her second quest is a bit better. While we learn about some history of Inazuma and have a cool boss fight, there's not much else to speak of. Yet again, the quest is weighed down by NPCs, which wouldn't be the worst thing, but remember what I said earlier about Paimon. She never shuts up the entire time. And Venti doesn't have a second story quest. I suspect the writers realized that if he did, we would have to talk to him about the calamity that happened 500 years ago. And I see no reason why he would keep that information from us. He's not that kind of person. As a result, they haven't given him a second story quest. But it's just a theory. Now before I move on, I feel like I owe these characters some mention. I'm talking about the Traveler, whether it be Aether or Lumine. Does anybody care about these two? Because I don't even think the game does. As stated before, your oh so helpful emergency food insists on talking over the main character. How are players supposed to connect with the series lead if they can't speak? They hardly emote. How would you know if they're differently characterized between the two of them? This game has so many colorful characters, it's disgusting to see the one who is supposed to be the main character is more boring than a damn cardboard cutout. And the journey we're on to find their sibling, does anyone even care? Do you care? Heck, does the game want you to care? After saving the city of Mondstadt and giving the people aid, the travelers were rewarded, not with gold or anything of particular value, but they do ask for the town's assistance in finding their sibling. And the country obliges with missing person posters. The knights don't help us in our search, nor do the townspeople. They simply put up posters and call it a day.
Better ways to help you than just putting up missing person posters.
So I just realized something. The Traveler's perfectly content with this. Like, their sibling is gone, and the Traveler's just like, it's fucking fine. Don't worry about it, you know, that's whatever, he'll come back. Like he's some lost dog. Honestly, I think you're supposed to forget about the main character quest. Who cares about your sibling? I don't. You don't. I don't even think the game does. The answer is nobody. Now, when it comes to the 4 stars, I honestly thought we weren't going to get any of them. Well, except for maybe a select few. This would change with Genshin's 1.4 update. It was here where we received Hangout events. These would serve as story quests for a portion of the 4-star lineup and give players the chance to learn a little bit more about their favorite 4-star characters. However, as you may have guessed, this only leads to more disappointment. You do get more interactions with these characters, yes, but like the 5 stars that preceded them, all the Hangouts do is scratch the surface. Now you could argue that that's the point. You're just hanging out with these characters, and nothing more. But for me, this doesn't cut it. On top of all that, upon first glance, you might think the Hangouts just might be a dating mechanic. How the Hangouts work exactly is just like a standard character quest. However, these particular quests have multiple endings. Where I think the mild confusion comes in is towards the heart mechanic that is used in these Hangout events. When the Hangout events were leaked, the heart mechanic misled some players into believing it was a dating mechanic. Now, from what I gathered, the heart mechanic acts as sort of a gauge between success and failure between the different various endings. Although, let me be honest, who's gonna fail the Hangout event? I don't think I could if I fucking tried. How badly do you have to fuck up to fail a Hangout event? How many people do you really think have failed a Hangout event? Besides, let me be frank, there's no way they're gonna add a dating mechanic in this game. There's just no way that would happen. Has it dawned on anyone that there's no actual romance in this game? I mean, for some of us it's pretty obvious. But for others, it just might be a terrible realization that they have yet to understand. See, I'm not totally against some of the characters having a relationship. I honestly think it could add a lot to the story, but unfortunately, it'll never come to pass. This includes the gay ships as well as the straight ones. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is. It doesn't matter whether it's Jean or Diluc, it doesn't matter if it's Ningguang or Beidou. None of them will ever be real. And here's why. Because certain parts of the player base are so protective over their waifus and husbandos. Due to the outcry from some of these fandoms, the developers haven't even bothered. Why lose the revenue? But losing the romance in this game isn't the worst thing. But it does leave me with one inescapable problem. A little itch in the back of my brain that I just can't quite get rid of. Who is Klee's dad? Like, does a guy like this even exist? Seriously, is he even in the game? She's referenced him in her profile. Kind of, but he is yet to be mentioned at all in the story. At first, I thought he was going to be mentioned at some point, but it's been 2 years, and in all that time, not a single piece of information is known about him. And honestly, at this point, I don't even know if he exists. Well, at least, not anymore. It seems he may have existed at one point in the story, but now, due to the issues I spoke of before, his presence may have all been but removed. Because, if he's married to Alice, that means she can't be your waifu. And let's just be real with ourselves. Has that stopped anyone before? Now you might say, why does this matter? Come on man, aren't you looking forward to Alice? To which I say, of fucking course you idiot. But let me ask you something. Aren't you the least bit curious about the man who was brave enough to put his dick in that level of crazy? Like what kind of dude saw the women of Teyvat, looked the other way, but then saw the crazy girl throwing bombs and said, yeah, fuck that. I'm just thinking it could add some cool backstory to both Klee and Alice. But then again, all the story is all surface level when it comes to characters. There's nothing really too deep. So many rich characters, and they barely have any backstory. Wait, what? What do you mean they have backstory? They do. Well, where the fuck is it? You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be fucking kidding me. So it seems after all my ranting and raving, there is a proper backstory for every character. And then a big point of this video is pointless. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Too bad, cause there's a catch. The information is laid out in front of you, yes, but solely in text form. So if you want to get through the backstory of every character, you're going to have to read an essay's worth of information, which wouldn't be so bad if you didn't have to do it, let's see, 52 times. You might as well pick up a novel at that point. How many players are actually willing to read that much information? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say 10% at best. Do you realize how many players probably skip over the dialogue from the main quests? And to be honest, most of the people I'm talking about are the adults. How about the children and teens? They probably can't even be bothered to look up the information. Heck, some of these players can't even be bothered to look up the information to see what their artifacts do. Speaking of which, if you go into the artifacts menu, you can find hidden lore deeper than anything present in the main quest. Going into the enhancement section and then clicking above it, you will find the description by hitting the button in the bottom right corner. Doing these steps will allow you to see a brief section of the game's history. As if artifacts weren't getting more complicated to read, now we have this BS. How many people do you think are going to read this? In the artifact sets Crimson Witch of Flames, as well as Pale Flame, you will find the story of a young woman from Mondstadt who lost her lover in a horrible battle while she was away studying abroad. Upon her return and discovering her lover's death, her heart grows cold, and thus she turns herself into liquid flame and becomes the Crimson Witch through the mystic arts she learned in Sumeru. That was the backstory for La Senora. What the actual Why do we have to do so much work to find the backstory of this one character? Why is it buried under so much work? I shouldn't have to go to YouTube to find a synopsis on her character. And look, no shame to the lore channels on YouTube. They do phenomenal work. But it shouldn't be a requirement for people to watch these just to understand the character. Look, be straight with me. How many of you knew the backstory of Senora? Or did you have to look it up on YouTube? That's the problem. And this is why I also have a problem with Scaramouche. Yet again, he also suffers from a lack of backstory. And yet, he's the one who's going to be a playable character, despite the fact that he's the biggest dick in the game. Yeah, you know what? I don't even care anymore. I feel more sympathy for La Senora than I ever did for Scaramouche. She was a little confrontational with us on occasion, to be sure, but Scaramouche has been the biggest douche since day one. At every turn, this guy has tried to kill us, insulted us, and been a complete jackass the entire time. But now I'm gonna have to put up with all the same girls saying, "Oh, don't worry, I can fix him." But that's neither here nor there. Can't wait to read about his backstory in the Husk of Opulent Dreams artifact set. You know, instead of being in a cutscene, nope, we'll just get it underneath mountains of text. Text that most of us aren't even going to be bothered to read. Now this last part may seem a bit nitpicky, but I think it has a place in this video. While we were playing together, my editor brought to my attention the repeated use of janky animations. Let me explain. During certain cutscenes, the characters will cycle through certain animations that are used in the game proper, typically used in gameplay. This by itself isn't the biggest issue. After all, the developers can't make new animations all the time, but it's becoming increasingly annoying over the years to see various characters try to be emotional and all that's used is recycled gameplay animations. Whenever you see characters talking, it's always the conversation animations. Whenever you see characters excited, the applause animation has been used. To illustrate this, let me take you back to 2.6. In 2.6, Klee arrives in Inazuma to celebrate the festival. Upon being introduced to things that excite her, her response is to simply applaud. This doesn't fit her at all. It's these stale animations that are being used throughout the whole game. Do you remember how the game begins? During the prologue, there was a plethora of unique animations during the cutscenes. But now it just seems they've gotten lazier. And now these days it seems we get less cutscenes, which means things just feel boring. Listen, I know it takes time and money to make really good cutscenes. However, they have the time and they have the money. So what happened to all the effort they put in at the very start? It's all gone. They've attracted players to their game. They no longer are required to put in the same effort as they once did, even when it comes to the story. What am I saying? They'll even cut out parts of the story. For a little while now, instead of having cutscenes and dialogue, Genshin will just fade to black. I'm not even kidding you. Here's some basic bitch text on a screen. Good enough for you, right? Just slap it on there. You'll figure it out. Why would they even bother? And even though it seems pretty petty, I really wish they would. I have slowly been getting more and more bored as the story goes on. Why should I care if the company doesn't? In 3.0, we are finally introduced to Colette, a forest ranger trainee who has been engaged in the story for a while. That is to say, in the manga. And instead of showing us her terrible backstory, the game yet again tells us instead, "You read the comic, right?" They'll say. "So you should already know about her character." They'll tell you. But this is not how you should tell your story. Lisa is a graduate of the Sumeru Academia, but she doesn't come with us to the region. Why bother having a guide who would know the ins and outs of the country? What else would she be doing? Amber knows Klee, but she didn't even bother coming with us. This game can be at its best when these characters are interacting with one another, but Genshin only seems to do this during the main story quest or limited events. If these characters don't ever interact with each other, the world just feels less lived in. And speaking of, this next part is going to seem really petty, but I might as well get out all my grievances. The NPCs are just really lazy. This comes back to how the animations are recycled. And not only are the animations recycled, but the character models are also recycled. And it doesn't help that they all have identical, inorganic idle animations. They all just feel robotic sometimes. Virtually none of the NPCs have their own unique behaviors. Everything feels like stock assets that were just placed there. Even if these cutscenes are more demanding, you couldn't have a design team handcraft these NPCs, as well as the animations? Assets of these animations. But they spent the money on the playable characters, because that's what Genshin does. It knows how to market its characters, but it fails on telling its story. As a fan of the game, I hope it gets better, but if things continue to stay the same, I suspect it never will.